Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast. This is Kim Ingram.
And this is Jesse Ennis, and we are with the Leadership Development Team of the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Jesse, I'm excited about our podcast today as we visit with some clergy in the conference about work that they have been doing around racial awareness, around conversations around race. I think that it gives us some good first steps about how people can become more aware and really things that they can do.
Yeah, I'm excited too, especially since I feel like this conversation is kind of, it encompasses everyone. I feel like it would, no matter what your background is or how you feel about the issue, I feel like they offered us a lot of great insights, a lot of great resources into taking further steps into the issue.
Yeah, so as the church, we want to reflect the kingdom of God, and I think that the conversation that we are able to have or kind of listen in on will help us to do that better. Absolutely, and also given the time frame of the release of this podcast, I feel like it is something that would be really helpful and really timely as well. So I hope all of our listeners can enjoy.
My name is Tom Latimer, and I serve currently Jamestown United Methodist Church in Jamestown, which is between High Point and Greensboro, in the Western North Carolina Conference. And I've been serving churches in the annual conference since 1983.
Hello, my name is Rodvegas, Ingram, and I serve as pastor at Memorial United Methodist Church in High Point, and I have been serving in the conference since 2001.
My name is Maria King, and I'm the Northern Piedmont District Vitality Associate.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. We are really excited to get into your experiences in this topic, and so I was wondering, just to kind of kick us off today, based on your experience, how do you feel the current climate is around awareness of racial equality?
It's better because it's worse. And let me explain what I mean by that. Culturally, we have reached a place of danger and of fear and concern, and that concerns me greatly. Compared to when I started in ministry, where I see more blatant signs of hatred, prejudice, fear, outward expressions, violent expressions that seem to be more apparent than they have been in a while. And I see that the racial strife seems to be a part of a bigger cultural a bigger cultural concern and issue, where there's just everybody's so much more fearful, contentious, and angry. And that plays itself out along racial fault lines as well as other fault lines. So that worries me. I think the need for what we're talking about and what we're trying to do has never been greater, at least in our culture, in American culture.
I would say that there is a need for us as human beings to treat each other as human beings and not look at each other as objects. But as Tom has already said, we're in a culture now where it seems like we are going backward in race relations. And we need to do a better job at treating everyone with the love and respect that we ourselves would like to receive. And I think if we can do that, then that would take care of a lot of the things that we see. But this is just my perspective. I think because we're moving into a time where perhaps the population is changing. And the majority is not going to be the majority much longer, that the majority is afraid of what's going to happen when they're not in the majority. So things are moving now at a pace where they want to try and keep things where they're still on top, and to diminish anyone else, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on gender or orientation. It's such that I want to keep my status, or I want to keep myself at the top and not worry about anybody else. And so when we don't look at any other person's story and we only highlight our stories, then we begin to diminish others. And I think we need to move away from that and look at everyone as being someone of sacred worth. Everyone is someone that God created.
So, question for you. What evidence do you see that that's actually what happened, what's happening, and that it's not just based on your experience as an African American pastor? Like, how do you feel like, what conversations have you had with others, or what type of evidence do you see that that's not just your worldview, but that's actually closer to what the climate actually is?
The conversations that I've had with others, we can look at it from a political standpoint. We see now, because again, that the population is changing. Now we see things going in place to put up barriers to keep people out of the nation based on race, or based on ethnicity, or based on class. And we see this, and it seems as if America now is okay with this. Whereas before, when it was the opposite, when it was people of the majority coming in, it's fine. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow people to come into the United States, but the thing is that we should look at it from a standpoint of showing love and humanity to those persons that are fleeing their country because of war, or because of drug cartels, or because of poverty, trying to come here to latch on to the American dream and to make their lives better. And I think our nation is better than where we are right now. I think we need to, again, step back and look at each and every one as being someone of worth and of value, because everybody can add to what is happening into the United States. Everybody has something to bring to the table if we would just allow them.
Couldn't agree more. And I see, Rod, exactly what you're referring to. I'm going to call what I'm in the white subculture, for lack of a better word. And in the white subculture, it's easy to see, and I see heavy fear. You referred to it, Rod. Heavy fear. And we've allowed, too many of us and too many of our leaders have allowed that fear to win the day. And too many of our leaders culturally and politically have played on those fears and used them for political gain, for whatever reason, and has allowed the divisions and the fault lines to become more pronounced, the anger and violent expression of that to become more pronounced. And we need to continue to lift up. I say we, as pastors and as people of faith, we need to continue to lift up the essence of the gospel that says perfect love casts out fear. Henry Nouwen wrote that the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. And that fear is at the root of all forms of hatred and bigotry and prejudice and violence. And so I think we've got to address that fear. And one of those, as you said, Rod, is that the culture is changing. The demographics are changing. The people who've been in the positions of decision making and power are no longer going to have that power and the vote and the support. And so other people are demanding and winning and having a place at the table in positions of power and decision making. And that is a good thing in the long run. But for some people, it's a fearsome thing. It's a fearful thing. And that's a shame. That's a shame.
Well, thanks to the gospel, we are all considered equal in the eyes of Christ. And so I believe that as a Christian community, we are covered by that. Why is it that we have to have these conversations if the gospel affords us that opportunity?
Because we're still trying to hear the gospel. We're still trying to heed it, follow it, allow it to work on us. And the fears are strong. The fear and the darkness is strong. Doesn't mean it wins, but it's strong. And it takes some work. It takes some intentionality to move from a fearful place to a victorious place, in again, borrowing that gospel language, in Christ, to be that light and to allow that light to fill us and then shine from us and break down those dividing walls of hostility and prejudice. So it's hard work. It's not easy. Jesus never indicated it would ever be easy. You got to sell your possessions and give them away to the poor and pick up your cross and come and follow. And many turn away from that narrow road, right? So it's not easy.
It's not easy whether you're in a black church or in a white church. Mm-hmm. We don't want to change. We have grown accustomed to the way things are in many cases. And so we don't want to change when the scripture tells us to love regardless. We want to love with some conditions. We want to love if it feels good. We want to love if it's comfortable for me. But when God said love one another, he put a period behind that. And so I think the issue here for all of us, why we need to have these conversations, is to help people see that it's going to take, like Tom said, some effort to step out on faith. It's going to take some effort to come out of our comfort zones to actually move into the realm of being the beloved church and the beloved community. We're not going to get there overnight, but one day at a time, one step at a time, and continuing to move forward, we will get there.
It's important to keep taking the steps. I cringe when I hear fellow church members in churches that I serve say things like, well, we settled this 50 or 60 years ago when we integrated the schools. Why do they keep wanting more? I cringe when I hear them say, well, we elected a black president. Doesn't that show that we've overcome all these problems and issues and prejudices? And I just cringe at that. And I think to myself, and I say sometimes to folks, that's window dressing. We got to get to our hearts and the heart of the matter, and the way our lives and our culture and our society is structured, and the walls and the barriers that are there for folks of color, and the assumptions that we make as white people and people of color. That's where we've got to do the daily, regular, weekly, monthly work of breaking those things down and exposing those to the light of the gospel. Anyway.
So you both talked about kind of work and effort and things that need to be done. And I know that you've been doing this work both personally and in your context in a variety of ways now for a while. I think one of our hopes is that people who listen to this podcast would have some things to take from it that they would think, this is something I can do. This is a first step I could take. So I wonder if you would be willing to share a little bit about how this has become a priority for you and what are some of the steps that you've begun to take as a leader in raising awareness, but also in bringing about change.
For me, it's been a great journey, starting with the beloved community, for us to begin to address when we became first aware about race. And then as we pastors sat in the room, black, white, male, female, began to unpack when we first became aware of race, then that was to spur us to go back to our locations, our congregations, and begin to also ask the question, to try to spark some sort of conversations that would bring about change, that would bring about transformation, that would bring about a change of attitude and a change of heart. And that's where we are now. We're still doing that, whether we're in cross-racial appointments or whether we're in appointments that look like us as pastors, as a Black pastor serving in a Black congregation. And so here it's an ongoing thing to try to get us to move to the point that we are trying to be the beloved church. And I believe that we have done it over time, but over time we kind of get into a point where we are stagnant. And so we need to be reminded time and time again and prodded time and time again to move forward, to push forward so that we can be the church that God is calling us to be.
I agree. One piece of the action item is the raising of awareness. And so that means exposing ourselves to persons, thoughts, perspectives that are outside of what we have been used to and grown up with. So there's one thing. Another thing is the actual action of connecting and interacting with persons whose experiences, racial, ethnicity, other differences are different from our own, and just spending time in the room with each other and listening to each other's stories. And that serves as the beloved community, therefore serves as a great model. And I agree with you, Rod. We've got a lot more we can be doing. But it serves as a great model for those of us who participate to go back to our congregations and then look for opportunities and seek to initiate opportunities where we can do more of that in our congregations, with our congregations, to get outside of their experience and expose ourselves to other perspectives. And there's where the real work needs to happen. Not enough of that has happened at all. Nowhere near enough. So we got a lot of work we need to be doing. And then I think in our preaching and teaching, it is a matter of lifting up the beloved community and lifting up Paul's words about that, the teachings and actions of Jesus, lifting that up in our sermons, in our studies, in our Sunday school classes, in our Bible studies, and letting that be a part of the mix of what we're working on, and reminding ourselves regularly, as Rod said, now this is what the gospel means. You can't take this piece of it. You can't take a piece of Jesus or just a little bit of what Paul was trying to say. You got to look at the full picture and realize the implications on us as Christians, as followers of Jesus. This is what it means, and continue to raise that awareness. So those are three things that I think ways we can tangibly move forward with this. Yeah.
I think it would also help to listen to each other's stories, because as we listen to each other's stories, we will find that we have a whole lot more commonalities than we have differences. Not to say that we don't have differences, but the things that bring us together, we would find that we have a whole lot more of those if we just sat and listened and dismissed the prejudgments that we have.
I remember some of our conversations this past fall where Nelson Johnson at Beloved Community Center, who is not a United Methodist, nor Wes is he a United Methodist. And we came in, all of us dragging because it was charge conference time. And so we had to do a little educating to Nelson to understand, well, where are y'all coming from? What's all this? All you Methodists keep talking about this charge conference thing. So we spent a little bit of time informing him about that and just sharing that. And that was a more mundane commonality, but it was a commonality that we realized, this is part of our life together, white pastors, black pastors, something we're doing, we know we have to do. But then we were able to springboard from that into some deeper conversation. And it was just a good touch point. And also to realize some of the things we have in common are very strong and much deeper than charge conference.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that takes us to a conversation perhaps about context, because what you were doing was sharing with him the context that you currently were in as United Methodist clergy at that time. And it reminds me of a question that was asked in a meeting that I was in February of last year. And this podcast is going to drop in February, which is Black History Month. And the question was from an African-American laywoman about whether any of the white pastors in the room who pastor white churches had talked about or celebrated or included Black History Month in sermons or in congregations at that time. And I wondered if you all could share a little bit about what a good answer to that question could be if somebody were being intentional about doing this work. What are some ways that we, particularly as white pastors in predominantly white churches, can lift up either Black History Month or throughout the year, how Black leaders or Black saints, African Americans and others have contributed to our lives and to our communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the Black church, it is a common part of worship to have a Black History moments in the worship service during the month of February. So when I was a pastor in a cross-racial appointment in a setting where I was the only person of color, and when we did our worship service in February, I didn't miss a beat. I just put on the bulletin at my white church, we will have Black History moments. And so each Sunday I would get up and read a historical event to highlight some of Black people that have made accomplishments. And that year in particular, I think I wanted to do something where Black people had made accomplishments or contributions to the United Methodist Church or the Methodist Church overall. But then there was one Sunday where I read a piece, A Day Without Black People, which highlighted the inventions of Black people. And at the end of that, many of the people in my white congregation wanted to get a copy of that particular piece because they were not aware that Black people had made these inventions or had made these particular contributions. So I thought that was an eye-opening experience. And so as I served that church for 4 years, then on my last year there in February, they were able to sing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and they sang every note just in place. It was wonderful.
Did you rehearse that with them?
No, they caught me by surprise.
Yeah. Wow. I'm of an age that I was in junior high and high school and older elementary school when in my community, growing up in High Point, North Carolina, the realities of school integration, busing, and some general social and civil unrest along racial issues was apparent in my community. And so that was, for me, was a first eye-opening time that said to me, you know, there's realities in my very own community that are beyond what I grow up with or know every day, and I need to be more aware of those. Then moving on into college and seminary, I was exposed to Black church studies, the stories of wonderful Black scholars, theologians, pastors, contributions they made, Howard Thurman, W.B. Du Bois, on and on and on. Reading autobiography of Malcolm X, learning who Marcus Garvey was, and then, of course, grounded in so much of the civil rights movement that was a part of. I didn't realize how much of that was going on in my life as a young teenager, and in the world in the South. And then later, as a young pastor, I can remember the impact of the series Eyes on the Prize, and to see that what I had looked at as isolated incidents in a larger movement were really part of a larger movement. It wasn't just the bridge in Selma, Alabama, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It wasn't just Martin Luther King's speech of the large march in 1963, I Have a Dream. It wasn't just the Montgomery bus boycott. It wasn't just things happening in Alabama. Or Albany, Georgia, or wherever. It was a big, huge movement calling to question the prejudices, the Jim Crow laws, the segregation, calling all that into question and lifting that up. And I remember how quiet my parents were as they watched and saw a lot of this. And they bit their tongue. If they had any prejudice, they did not indicate that to my sisters and me, but rather they had us look at and consider what was going on in the world, and my mother especially, bless her heart, a beautiful, kind Christian woman who believed that all of us were made in God's image, and that the racial divides in our country were not the deepest truth, were not God's truth for us. And so all of those things led me to open my eyes more. And that led me then to be a little more sensitive to and aware of and willing to lift up as a pastor, not just on Black History Month, though that needs to happen then too, or not just on the Martin Luther King birthday weekend that we're celebrating this coming weekend, but throughout the year and throughout my ministry. And so using examples of interactions I've had and friendships I've had across racial lines, using those in sermons and in Bible study lessons, lifting up some of the wokeness that I've been blessed to receive from brothers and sisters, my own son, great authors and resources. That has influenced me in sermons. I can remember a particular series I preached just in the church that I'm in right now about 2 years ago in the fall, Making God's Love Real. It was the series, and culturally, socially, across racial lines, gender issues, and so forth. I just kind of did a 5-week series on all those. And the one that was probably the most poorly received, that I received the worst marks on for the sermon, was the one that had to do with racial prejudice and crossing those lines and helping white people wake up to the bubble that we live in and the racial prejudice that is the soup that we live in. And there were a lot of folks, not all, but there were a lot of folks that didn't want to hear that here. And there were some who did resonate with that. But that's when we got back to that comments like, well, we elected a Black president. We thought we settled all these racial issues, 50 years ago. And then, Charlottesville happened, soon after that series. Oh my goodness. It put in bold relief that yes, we need Black History Month and to acknowledge the contributions of Black folk in our culture and our society. But we also need to be working on our hearts, working on the dividing lines that go right down our spirits in each of us individually and as a people. So, yeah.
It's interesting. You were just mentioned then, and you had talked before about kind of living in a bubble and the need to get outside of that bubble. I was born in Albany, Georgia in 1967 and have periodically wondered, and we didn't live there for long, but what was going on at the time that I really don't know much about. And then in seminary, I remember almost nothing on a given day, but I remember distinctly a professor in a Christian education class introducing or mentioning the song "We Shall Overcome," and he was floored that we didn't know that song. And that just really struck me that I didn't know that song, and I grew up in the Deep South. And so it goes back to context, but also the bubble that you can stay in your bubble. At least as white people, we can stay in our bubble, and we need to not to get out of that. And there are resources that help with that. And Maria, I was wondering that the Northern Piedmont District has been doing some intentional work around helping people develop connections and relationships and kind of getting outside of the bubble and thinking differently. And just wondering if you would give us an idea of some of the things primarily that you've been doing that other people can do in other places.
I think as a white people, it is very important, whether you're a lay person or a clergy person, to learn your context, your town, where you're at, and learn it from a different perspective. There's history books and there's history books. There's history books written by white people and there's history books written by brown people, women, white men, Black men. And I think it's important for you to really learn the history. I mean, we're called to parishes, and we have to, know our laity, and the world is our parish, is to kind of learn the context of how your community was formed. And I think that's the first step, is to kind of get out of the denial or the ignorance of the bubble that you come in, and learn a little bit about who's in your town and how your town was formed. And I think it's also building relationships with people that are not easy, because they're outside your bubble. And it takes a lot of time and energy from, especially when you want to be a productive pastor, or you want to get all these mission stuff as laity. We want to get all this mission stuff done, but it's more of laity and clergy getting to know the people in your community, to build the community together and be a partner. I think for us to be partners with our community is is the gospel, and not we're going to do things for people. I think the gospel says we do things with people. We're the body of Christ. And I think that the posture of the church, of the lay person, of the clergy person, I think that's a great way to start, is relationships and opening up your perspective. I always teach churches that for every perception, there's a deception. And it takes a while for us to kind of think about that and think about what deception our perception has. And I think that's what I try to do every time I walk in a room, no matter what kind of church I'm walking into, or meeting I'm walking into, or community meeting I'm walking into, that I really need to be much more aware of how I'm thinking, what will my voice mean as a white person in the room, for me to be as quiet as possible and to listen first. Because I know, as a woman going into a room with all men, there's those, my perception is a little different, and to be aware of it. So as a white person, when I'm in a room, I try to be very aware that there's a way that you can offer so much hospitality, and that is the gospel.
We had spoken a little bit about the beloved community. Can you explain a little bit of how that came to be?
In 2016, the Northern Piedmont Vitality Team gathered to set some foundations. Like, what are the litmus tests of what we want to support, what we want to guide our churches to say this is the church being vital. And overwhelmingly, the room of 22 people that are in our room, because we have representatives from every missional network, laity and clergy, overwhelmingly, everyone said we really need to make racism and white supremacy and the idea of God's beloved community a priority. And we also, to do that, the other priority is that we need to focus on mature spirituality. And with that, the team and I did a lot of research on who would be great partners, because we don't know everything. We need to learn, we need to grow. Who are going to be our partners? And one of our partners was the Beloved Community Center in downtown Greensboro. And Nelson Johnson, Joyce Johnson, and later Wes Morris joined us, and they became our partners. And everything we do, we say we're partners. Even the how we gathered for the last 3 years, we're partners. It's not a Northern Piedmont District thing. It's not a Beloved Community Center thing. It's we're partners together, and we want to witness that to the rest of the community. And it started out with us gathering the largest the pulpits of our largest churches, those pastors, those large church pastors in our district. We gathered them for 2 days because I knew that all of those pastors in our district, Northern Piedmont District at that time, were all white men. And before I could get them in the room with diversity, I need for them to understand what white supremacy was and how they embodied that with just by being the big white church in town. So they can know how to be a partner. And then 2 weeks later, we gathered all the clergy in our district to participate and work on how do we move toward being beloved community as clergy leaders. And then after that, those 2 sessions, all of the clergy at the end of both of those groups said, when are we coming back? Not one person, dropped out or didn't want to come. So then the next year I worked with Beloved Community Center, and we did a lot of grant writing and organization, and we decided we would have monthly lunches with the people in the community and the clergy to have conversation. And I guess about 6 months after that, they said, we're going to need some longer time to have conversations. We just can't do this over lunch. But we needed that because we needed to form relationships and just eat together, know each other. And so the third year, we have had day-long retreats 6 times a year. And the first part of the retreat, we do a lot of inward journey work together. And then the last part of the retreat, we do a lot of talk about outward journey. Many of those outward journeys come with individual churches doing work. But some of those, as our missional networks have come together as clergy and said, you know what, we're a missional network. What can we do together? And so one of the missional networks meets with all denominations, Black, Latino, Latinx, Baptists, Quaker, and they have Bible studies together. And a lot of white supremacy comes into that play. They don't even they give themselves the name, they call it the Blue Cloth Table Group, because they met where there was a blue tablecloth, because they just didn't want to give it a name. And then another missional network has decided that they wanted to bring their laity to the forefront of this. And so they have Christian conversations on race. They're bringing lay people into the room. And these congregations are a mixture of large white church, small white churches, churches of color. And really, they did that a couple of times the first year, and then they were very intentional with having it for 5 times the next year. And it's a matter of just beginning the conversation. When we started this, we just knew that it took time, and we need to know how to be partners with each other. And it's kind of embodied that. So every step we take forms the next step. We haven't made this a project where we're going to, look how great we are. Look what we're doing. But this is a project of an initiative that's, okay, we taken the step. What's the next step? Let's do this together.
I would like to add how essential this has been for us as pastors. And Rod, I'll let you speak for yourself, but for myself, just serving as a pastor of any size Methodist church, and mine is a larger one in the district, the pull and the demand and the stresses and the tension of just taking care of everything in our congregation is, this is a confession, works against stepping out and being a part of something beyond our walls and beyond the day-to-day pastoral demands and cares. And so having some structure to this, having this invitation coming, every month or every other month, and knowing that I'm setting that aside on my calendar, and that's the day I'm going to contribute most of that day I'm going to spend with the Beloved Community Center and doing the things that we're doing there to help me get out of my routines and out of the bubble, is just essential. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the intentionality and the structure and the planning. Because otherwise, I'm afraid I would just slide right back into the big, huge soup that is serving a church as a pastor.
It has been helpful for us to come together. I look at the time together as iron sharpening iron. There are times when we get to the Beloved Community Center where I might be going through a particular issue, and I'm able to share and talk with other pastors and get some information that will help me. But then there are other times when somebody else is going through, and I'm able to share something with him or her to help them along the way. So it's just been beneficial for me in my ministry. And I think for all of us who attend, it's very beneficial to help us to grow on our outward edges and to look at ways that we can go back and make a difference in our local church, and then also take that into the community.
And I'll say this on a lighter note, as one who is musically challenged, when Rod or Tammy lifts up a tune at the beginning of our time or in the middle of our time at Beloved Community Center, and we all start singing whatever the song may be, and the movement, the rhythm that we get into with that, that's a real gift that those of you who are blessed with that can offer to the rest of us who are not. And then we all find ourselves lifted up, and the commonality of just singing songs together. And those are prayers. I mean, there's songs and prayers that we lift up together musically, and that's been a wonderful part of it.
If I was a pastor looking to take the first step, what are some resources that you guys can provide that would be helpful to do so?
When I served in Rockingham County, pastors in Reedsville started a book club. And so they intentionally picked 6 Black pastors and 6 white pastors. And they started reading Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin. And I think that was a good way to begin to talk about race in the community. It inspired us so that we started a group in Eden and in Western Rockingham County with the same intentionality of having Black pastors and white pastors coming together to begin to have this conversation about race.
I would suggest that folk look for and find 2 things in their communities. One would be if you're a white pastor or a white member of a church, find out when the local chapter of the NAACP is meeting, and attend one of those meetings and come as a friendly presence, an open presence, and listen. Just listen. Another one, more active, I guess you'd say, and community-oriented, might be to find out when the next event related to the Poor People's Campaign is happening in your area. A lot of those are kind of re-energizing right now all through the South. And attend one of those events and learn and listen and hear what's going on. One book that I've read recently that's been very helpful to me is called Reconstructing the Gospel by Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. And I would recommend that to anyone who's looking to broaden their minds and become more aware of perspectives beyond their own limited perspective.
I guess the first step I would do as a white person is to read the book Many Colors by Soong-Chan as a first step, just to kind of let that book soak in. As a pastor or as a layperson in ministry, I think it really talks about the many colors in ministry and the church, to get kind of grounded in that, the idea of many colors. And then another piece that I would think every person in the United States should watch is the video on the Truth and Reconciliation work and the process in Greensboro, North Carolina. And that is on YouTube. There's going to be new books on it, and there's already been many books written about it. But I think we need to be much more aware of what truth and reconciliation work has happened and how it's failed, but also how it's remained a part of the history in the United States.
Thanks. And we'll put in the show notes links to all of these resources that you have mentioned. They're very helpful. So it sounds to me that really being intentional is one of the kind of first steps, is just taking a step, doing something kind of on purpose. And it may be reading a book to get started. It may be somehow immersing yourself in a culture that's different than yours through TV or music or movies. And then kind of stepping one step at a time, kind of, as you said, Maria, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take a step and then the next step and then the one after that. The annual conference will be offering some training and resources throughout this next quadrennium. And so there will be intentionality on the part of the conference to kind of expand on what this district and other districts have done. And so we will encourage leaders, clergy and lay leaders in the conference to participate and be a part of that. And I think you all have really helped us get a vision, help us to see individually what we can do and how we can grow. And we really appreciate you all being willing to come and share your stories and experiences with us in order to help others to grow as well.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. That's WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.